The Karate Kid is my favorite movie of all time. And you know that that's true because, unlike Citizen Kane, no one lies about The Karate Kid being their favorite movie. But The Karate Kid was and is an amazing movie that spawned a strong sequel and has already been remade twice since its debut in 1984. Yeah, no idea why one of the remakes says 3 and stars the same cast, but even the director said it was the same exact movie. So, that said, Terry Silver was still really fun, and the
"It's okay, lose to opponent, must not lose to fear"
moment can still absolutely give me goosebumps. But since the conclusion of this trilogy, the franchise has struggled to ever reach the highs of the first 2 movies. There was of course the occasional reference to the franchise in pop culture that the cast would partake in, but there was nothing that took place in, as Ralph Macchio described it, the Miyagi-verse. Until 2017, that is. When 3 producers, Josh Held, John Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg, were given the reins to produce a sequel series that follows Daniel LaRusso and his first rival, Johnny Lawrence, as they rediscover their love for martial arts in adulthood. This all being sparked by Johnny's decision to reopen Cobra Kai, the dojo that turned him into a victim, bully, winner, and loser all at once. Yeah, needless to say, it's a bit complicated, and LaRusso isn't happy about this, as in his youth, Cobra Kai only ever tormented him. Quite a pitch, right? But the biggest departure found in this new series would be Johnny's role as a protagonist, with as much of the story being told from his perspective as LaRusso's. In fact, it was this concept that sold an initially hesitant Ralph Macchio, who, alongside Johnny's actor William Zabka, star in and produce this series. But enough facts, this video is all about my opinions, so what was my reaction to this series being announced? I hated it. A lot. In fact, I was furious about this. See, this was announced amidst the start of the current age of reboots. Everything was starting to receive a revival. Every movie, game series, TV show, you name it. And while some have been great, fun, and respectful towards the original material while allowing us to relive our fondest memories, some are the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Yeah. But I kept an open mind, and Season 1 blew me away. In fact, it's the first and only time I've watched the entirety of a show's season in one sitting. And I watched through Seasons 2 to 4 in just a day or 2 each multiple times. And while, yes, Cobra Kai is a good show with writing I can gush about all day, that's not what makes this show so incredible, at least to me. Rather, it's how worthy this series is of the Karate Kid legacy. Simply put, Cobra Kai acts as the perfect follow-up to the Karate Kid trilogy as it expands on the themes and ideas presented in the original films, oftentimes better than its predecessor. And while the Karate Kid series has had its share of stumbles, Cobra Kai honors, embraces, and at times redeems the entirety of the franchise's history, good, bad, and ugly alike. And though the storytelling isn't always perfect, mostly just because I really, really hate the will they won't they trope, as a sequel, I couldn't possibly ask for more. Also, I'm talking about the entirety of a franchise. That means spoilers. You'd think it's obvious, but you'd be surprised what comments you get on YouTube after a while. And I'm also going to refer to the Star Wars movies a couple of times, but I don't really spoil anything in the new movies beyond just like the premise of the trilogy, you know? One of, if not the main themes of the original movies is balance. When we meet Daniel LaRusso, to put it simply, he is deeply unbalanced. In fact, upon moving to LA, the first thing he does is kick a door in a guy's face and get into a fight with a literal biker gang made up of ninjas. And while he didn't start the fight, his gut reaction wasn't exactly to de-escalate. Look, I'm not in the Daniel LaRusso is the bad guy camp, but he does sucker punch a clearly more experienced fighter who was intending on walking away, so yeah, safe to say he's not exactly the brightest when we meet him. In fact, when one of his pranks goes too far and this gang seeks violent revenge, our brilliant protagonist immediately runs away from any authority figures that would be in a position to help him, causes a multi-car accident in the process, and chooses to outrun that ninja gang of athlete bikers I mentioned. In case you missed that, he tried to outrun ninja bikers. Again, not a bright kid. He then meets his surrogate father figure, Mr. Miyagi, who teaches him karate, but more importantly, balance. As a result of this relationship, Daniel becomes a more at peace individual who almost always attempts to de-escalate a situation before resorting to violence despite his fighting expertise. Even more impressively, we see throughout the movies that Mr. Miyagi's lifestyle leads to, well, Mr. Miyagi finding balance despite insurmountable odds. Whereas Daniel's frustration stems from losing his father and being forced to move, Miyagi faced unimaginable pain in his youth. While Miyagi served the US Army during World War II, earning the Medal of Honor in the process, his pregnant wife was kept in a Japanese internment camp. When Miyagi returned with the title of war hero, he found no wife or child waiting for him, as they both passed during childbirth due to the horrid conditions of the camps. And while this loss would haunt him for the rest of his life, Mr. Miyagi still finds relative balance and lives a pacifist lifestyle. And as he ages, Daniel continues to hold these lessons in the highest regard possible, nearly worshipping Mr. Miyagi and his teachings. So, how does Cobra Kai expand on this theme, on balance? Well, by focusing more on the idea of individualism. See, throughout the original movies, anyone who opens up to Miyagi finds honor, balance, or redemption. But what happens in a world without Miyagi, where Daniel is the only student of his teachings around? Better yet, what happens when Miyagi's lessons just don't work for everyone, be it as a martial artist or a person? Or when they clash with the natural personality of his star pupil? Well, that's where Cobra Kai's theme of individualism comes in. Throughout Cobra Kai, Daniel attempts to live and promote Miyagi's lessons, but they constantly clash with Daniel's personality. Yeah, as much as he is a good person, you can't deny that Daniel starts to look down on others while placing himself on a pedestal. And while this is partially because of his newfound economic status, a lot of this ego is because of Miyagi's teachings, or, well, more accurately, Daniel's misinterpretation of them. Since Miyagi's teachings were always the perfect means of guidance for him, Daniel turns these teachings into a flawed ideology in several ways. For starters, he assumes that his way of finding balance is the only right way. When other people like Johnny or Daniel's daughter Sam are able to find success through other ideologies, he struggles to understand this and invalidates it without question. In fact, after reuniting, it takes an entire year for him to finally acknowledge the value in Johnny's way of thinking, which results in two karate champs that initially struggled against more well-rounded opponents. And it's this need for these two ideologies to coexist that really makes our theme of individuality, and honestly the storytelling as a whole, shine. You see, our protagonist from the 80s has a chip on his shoulder from what we've seen him overcome. While we still root for him because of our history together, the show is comfortable letting us see his flaws hurt others. Whereas Johnny, our original antagonist, opens himself up to learning and considering other worldviews within months of meeting his star pupil Miguel, and eventually forms his own. And it's this openness that leads to Johnny's accelerated growth as a fighter, partner, and person. And while the pacifist lifestyle isn't for him, he becomes far more pragmatic than Daniel, and this is part of what endears his once antagonist to us. This can be seen beautifully during Season 4. When a situation between Cobra Kai and Miyagi Fang, the dojo shared by both Daniel and Johnny, escalates into a fight, the Miyagi Fang students choose to take Daniel's approach to conflict resolution, literally. They soak their adversaries with a dirty trick and leave instead of standing their ground. And upon hearing this, Daniel praises them, as he sees any conflict resolved without a thrown punch as a success. However, Johnny immediately chastises the kids, saying they were naive for escalating a situation without expecting retaliation. Now, Daniel instantly jumps to the conclusion that Johnny was encouraging a brawl when, in reality, Johnny was telling his students that they should have walked away instead of welcoming consequences. And despite Daniel's ego, Johnny ends up being correct, as one of their students, Hawk, ends up being the one to pay for their actions. And it's events like this, events that prove Daniel's lack of flexibility as a liability to both him and his students, that eventually leads him to finally understand one of Miyagi's most important lessons. Everyone has to find their own path. Relying on someone else's will lead to failure. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Cobra Kai manages to take this one lesson from Miyagi and turn it into a central theme of the series, and does so in a masterful way. And I could go on further about how they do this with several more themes, and to be honest, I probably will in the future, but it's worth mentioning now that Cobra Kai's expansion of the Karate Kid trilogy's ideas and themes, while crucial, is not the only thing that served instrumental in crafting a perfect sequel. When following up a beloved franchise, a big question is always going to be, how? How does this resolved story reopen? How do these characters get reintroduced to the world? A flawed approach that we've seen is to have the characters undergo a dramatic change in the time that takes place since the resolution of the previous story. Take the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Leia and Han are separated, Han goes from being a general to a smuggler, again, and Luke completely turns his back on the Jedi Order. And all the explanation we're given for this is something bad happened with this one guy. And yeah, if you discuss the screenwriting on a technical level, it works due to there being a clear cause and effect, but it still feels cheap because we followed these characters over an entire trilogy and we watched them grow just so they can regress again off screen. Like, imagine if the Phantom Menace served as the entirety of Anakin's backstory. We see him join the Jedi Order, but the ways he's led to the dark side are just told to us in a couple of lines. To say the least, this element of the sequels received a lot of disapproval, but we are picking up decades after the events of the Karate Kid trilogy, right? The characters can't be exactly the same, or that would be both uninteresting and unrealistic. So, what do? Well, let's look at the approach Cobra Kai takes. Our two returning protagonists are fully recognizable, being introduced with similar personalities to when we last saw them. The only thing that really changes is their status, at least at a first glance. While Johnny came from wealth and Daniel from much less, in Cobra Kai those roles are reversed. Now Daniel lives in a fancy mansion and Johnny resides in an apartment with constant maintenance issues. And the reason for this is very simple. Daniel started a successful business, and Johnny severed ties with his wealthy but abusive stepfather. But rather than give us throwaway lines just to fill us in like with some reboots,
somehow Palpatine returned.
We get full plot lines dedicated to these events. So Daniel is still presented to us as a lovable but passionate guy with plenty of New Jersey pride. Of all states to have pride in, I mean, weird choice, but I'll allow it. But they add this lack of awareness to him that helps us understand Johnny's dislike of him.
I kicked his face.
And as for Johnny, he's still this rough around the edges guy who, to put it lightly, sucks at communication.
No. I didn't call her a bitch. I said she was bitching at me. There's a difference. You're firing me because of that bitch?
Just break my radio! Yeah.
Don't touch it, punk.
But kicks ass when he needs to. Oh, but wait, during our iconic pilot fight, Johnny attempts to de-escalate the situation.
Just leave the dork alone.
That's new. And we get to see the genius of the writing behind our two protagonists. Switch their social statuses with one another, have the personalities seem the same at first, but then introduced plenty of nuances that are explored as the show progresses. Now all you've got to do is force these characters to come face to face for the first time since they went, well, face to foot, and there you have your pitch. And the really interesting thing is, the writing for these nuanced moments for Johnny is 100% set up in the original trilogy. During his first fight with Daniel, Johnny did try to de-escalate after showing off his fighting prowess. At the tournament, we see him trying to be a good sport while his sensei forces him to show no mercy. And when chastised by his abusive sensei, John Kreese, for coming in second place, Johnny stands his ground and says he did his best and that was enough. There's a lot more nuance to Johnny in the first two movies, definitely more than I remembered as a kid. So putting that nuance under a microscope and really exploring it, perfect. And of course, these shades of gray apply to absolutely everyone. Honestly, Shades of Grey pretty much is the premise of the show summarized in 3 words. Except for Amanda. She's perfect. I don't care if she threatened a teenager and realized it was wrong, Amanda LaRusso is perfect. But even characters like John Kreese receive a fleshed out backstory that forces us to witness the horrors he experienced while at war. Turns out that, yeah, Kreese does make up stories, but he's been through his fair share, and at one point was an honorable man. And while Terry makes his first appearance since his coke-induced rampage of the 80s, it turns out he tried to live a peaceful, balanced life for decades, and is only dragged back into violence when Kreese manipulates him and takes advantage of his trauma and debt to Kreese. And as a side note, because there's nowhere else to really mention this in the video, but the writing that went into Kreese's ability to manipulate those around him is incredible and deserves a lot of credit, especially those he's had a holdover before. But there's one last thing done with the characterization that I think sets this series apart from reboots of the past. You see, in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker was the guy. He shows mercy to Darth Vader despite barely squeaking out a win against him, and he puts himself at considerable risk in doing so. He's also able to turn Darth Vader, the second most evil man in history with a body count unfathomable if you count his work on the Death Star, into a Jedi again, to the point that he becomes a Force ghost, which is something only Jedi could do, not the Sith. And as I mentioned, the sequel trilogy received backlash for Luke becoming a hopeless hermit, largely because such a drastic change in character happened off-screen. Now, alright, why am I bringing up Star Wars again? Well, can you think of a wise fellow who brings balance to those around him throughout his story that left behind an incredible legacy that transcends the franchise? Yeah, obviously I mean Allie's mean friends in the first movie. Or, I guess you could say Miyagi. It's a bit of a stretch, but I'll allow it. Now, I already talked about the unimaginable loss that Miyagi faced in his youth. And if you don't know what I'm talking about because you skipped around the video despite not being familiar with the franchise, shame on you. There are consequences for your actions, and it's about time you learned it. Okay? I'm doing this because I care. Okay, let's move on. But we find out in the original movie that Miyagi will occasionally get very drunk and relive the worst day of his life. It's an incredible, heartbreaking scene, and it serves to humanize and demystify, as CinemaWins puts it, the character to us, the viewer. It makes Miyagi more than just a one-note, calm dude that helps Daniel. It makes him tragic, and his bond with Daniel far more meaningful. It adds to the depth of the character by showing how he endures his trauma without feeling the need to state he's a bad person of any kind. He just has scars. And I've talked a lot about Daniel's misinterpretations of Miyagi's teachings, so what am I getting at here? Well, simply put, the handling of Mr. Miyagi in Cobra Kai has been perfect, and serves as all the evidence you need to see that those behind the series truly understand what was and wasn't needed to bring this franchise back. It would have been easy to reveal that Miyagi was actually an alcoholic, and before his passing, he and Daniel have a falling out of some kind due to Daniel being more cognizant of Miyagi being a bad person, kind of similar to Johnny's altered view on his relationship with Kreese. This disillusionment would have been an easy place to have us reconnect with Daniel during the events of Cobra Kai. Not only would it have been easy, but it would have set up a conflict for Daniel in a technically adequate way. But it would have felt like a shot through the heart, with you to blame, because you'd give Miyagi a bad name. So the same way that Cobra Kai doesn't try to ridicule you for enjoying the less popular moments in the Karate Kid's history, it doesn't rely on ruining your nostalgia in the name of challenging you, because, yeah, that's totally fun and necessary for a cheesy 80s franchise with universally beloved characters. Alright, I'm gonna stop making Star Wars jokes now because I'm really just a casual fan and the hardcore fans kinda scare me. If you're brave enough to like Rise of Skywalker, you are incapable of things that I can't imagine, and so you scare me. But the writers still chose to present us with some challenge throughout the series, and they do so in a brilliant way. So for example, this series forces us to look at conflicts we saw play out decades ago through a new lens. We're further challenged by learning to forgive those who wronged our protagonists in the past, even disproving our assumptions about those we see as irredeemable, even within the context of the show. It's a lot better than just hopeless hermit. When it came to The Last Jedi, my feelings were that it was quite possibly the best movie that Star Wars ever released, but probably the worst Star Wars movie. that makes sense. Yes, the writing was more impressive than the majority of the franchise, sure. But despite all of that, it just felt soulless. It felt like doing something different, having individuality, was more important than giving fans of Star Wars what they wanted. That, of course, for me, was a fun time with endearing but recognizable characters while still providing us with some level of challenge. Prequels don't look so bad now, do they? Alright, I still haven't seen 2. I fell asleep when I tried. I really liked 3 and enjoyed 1, though, but I digress. Cobra Kai is successful because it accomplishes the impossible. It honors every fan of every corner of the Miyagi-verse. What we've loved about the franchise for years, they endear us to more. And what was mostly hated is redeemed and given new life. Tell someone 8 years ago that one of the most hated villains in the franchise would be a legitimate menace to society with a vastly improved performance. From an actor who's been retired for almost as long as his career was, no less. I love this franchise, and it has always meant so much to me. I rewatch the Karate Kid film every year. I show it to everyone who will watch. It is just a movie I will never get tired of. Cobra Kai is the perfect sequel to the Karate Kid series because it was made by people who love this franchise the way I do. It was made by people who want to see it grow in ways that are authentic to why we fell in love with the story of Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi in the first place. Ralph Macchio, William Zabka, Hayden Schlossberg, Josh Held, and John Hurwitz deserve all of the praise in the world for bringing back a franchise I have loved for longer than I can remember, and doing so in a way that honors the most meaningful movie to my life. And I can't wait to see this series keep adding to this amazing universe. Till, it reaches a natural stopping point. Do not milk this series, please. When it needs to end it. I physically cannot go through what I did with The Walking Dead with Cobra Kai. I can't. When the series reaches its end, please end it. Please. Still amazing so far, though, and I would absolutely watch a sequel series about Miguel, Robbie, and Sam, so I'll wait another 20 years for that one, don't worry. But, hey, thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It actually really helps me out a lot. I make comedic commentary videos, critiques, and video essays every Friday. And if you're not convinced, you can check out a recommendation above. Alright, well, thanks again. Bye!